By 1810, the impact of Tecumseh's diplomacy could be felt up and down the Wabash. By May, nearly 1,000 people had streamed into Prophetstown, and all spring and summer, the numbers continued to build. Fearing imminent bloodshed, William Henry Harrison called for a contingent of federal troops to reinforce the territorial capital at Vincennes, then sent a messenger to Prophetstown itself, urging the prophet to come to Vincennes to air grievances about the Treaty of Fort Wayne. In the end, it was Tecumseh himself who replied, telling the messenger that he personally would come to meet with Harrison to discuss Indian outrage over the newly ceded lands. On August 12, 1810, a party of 75 warriors with Tecumseh in command arrived at Harrison's headquarters for the historic confrontation.
There were some canonical stories about Tecumseh, which even if you knew nothing else, you could say, this is someone you have to reckon with. One of them is that confrontation with Harrison in 1810. That magnificent, really, confrontation where he knew a conflict was coming, and so did Harrison. And here you have two representatives of entirely different philosophies and points of view. And neither individual was afraid of the other. Harrison had no need to be. The resources were all behind him. But Tecumseh, there was no sense that being in a weak position should mitigate or reduce his point of view or the worthiness of his cause.
How, my brother, can you blame me for placing little confidence in the promises of our fathers, the Americans? You have endeavored to make distinctions. You have taken tribes aside. You wish to prevent the Indians from uniting and from considering their land the common property of the whole. I do not see how we can remain at peace with you if you continue to do so. Brother, this land that was sold, and the goods that were given for it, they were done only by the few. If you continue to purchase land from those who have no right to do so, I do not know what will be the consequence. I now wish you to listen to me, brother. I tell you so because I am authorized by all the tribes to do so. I am at the head of them all. I am a warrior, and all the warriors will meet in 2 or 3 moons from this. Then I will call those chiefs who have sold the land to you, and shall know what to do with them. For, brother, we want to save this land. We do not wish you to take it. And if you take it, you shall be the cause of the trouble between us.
The United States has not treated the Indians dishonestly nor unjustly. Indians are not one nation, nor do they own the land in common. Has not the Great Spirit given them separate tongues? This council is over.
He stood up in a very remarkable and frank way, and more or less admitted to Harrison that war would come. I think he said at one point, "You are pushing us into a conflict. We have no alternative. This is going to happen if you continue with this policy." And of course, Harrison certainly was going to continue that policy. But both men gave no ground.
For nearly a week, the talks continued. Tecumseh insisting the lands be returned, Harrison insisting they had been fairly acquired, refusing to return them. Before the deadlock meetings adjourned, Harrison promised to pass Tecumseh's demands on to the president in Washington, adding, however, that he very much doubted the request would be granted. No one present, ever forgot Tecumseh's reply.
As the great chief in Washington is to determine the matter, I hope the Great Spirit will put some sense into his head to induce him to direct you to give up this land. It is true he is so far off. He will not be injured by the war. He may still sit in his town and drink his wine, whilst you and I will have to fight it out.
The implicit obedience and respect which the followers of Tecumseh pay to him is really astonishing. More than any other circumstance bespeaks him one of those uncommon geniuses who spring up occasionally to produce revolutions and overturn the established order of things. If it were not for the vicinity of the United States, he would perhaps be the founder of an empire that would rival in glory that of Mexico or Peru.
Now, Tecumseh did a remarkable thing. He said a remarkable thing in 1810 when he confronted Harrison at Vincennes. He said something I don't think any Native American had said before, and I don't think many had said afterwards. He stood up, defended Indian land, and said he represented every Indian on the continent. Now, what a preposterous assertion, even for someone whose life had been so far-flung as his. But to make such a claim at that time, it was an absolutely preposterous thing to say. Yet what he was saying was that he understood that Native American peoples were in a particular historical predicament, and he was articulating that predicament, and he was doing it for all of them.
In late August, writing that Tecumseh's great talents alone were holding together the heterogeneous mass of warriors on the Wabash, Harrison received permission to march on Prophetstown. And 1 month later, on September 26, 1811, at the head of a force of nearly 1,000 men, headed north towards the Indian stronghold, 180 miles away. As reports came into Prophetstown of Harrison's approaching army, hundreds of warriors converged on the Indian village to defend it.
As Tecumseh watches the American army advance, he is faced with the question of what to do. You sit and wait, see if the American intentions are peaceful, or should you strike against it? When Tecumseh hears of the American army advancing, he interprets this as an act of aggression.
Around 2 o'clock on the afternoon of November 6th, Harrison's 1,000-man force clambered up a steep ravine on the eastern side of a narrow stream called Burnett's Creek and went into camp on a narrow bench of high ground planted with high oak trees. 1 mile to the east lay Prophetstown, stretching south along the Wabash from the mouth of the Tippecanoe. As the light began to fail, 2 officers and an interpreter rode out under a white flag to convey Harrison's orders that the Indian camp disperse.
Tippecanoe, there's a crucial moment on November 6th when Harrison arrives. He arrives with more than 1,000 men, and Harrison and Tecumseh agree to meet the next day to discuss how they might reach some kind of compromise. But on the night of November 6th, Tecumseh is besieged by his Western Algonquian allies. And they tell him, look, we have to fight. We have to surprise them. They think we're going to have a discussion, but let's wage a preemptive strike. To come all that way and to do nothing but wait for Tecumseh made little sense to them.
We say get the heckle.
And so Tenskwatawa goes against his brother's wishes for him. You know, he caves to pressure. And not only that, but he tells his allies that they'll be safe from American bullets, that his power as a medicine man is such that no one will be harmed.
Sometime in the night, a long column of warriors began to file silently out of the village, heading in a long arc for the northwest corner of the American encampment.
It was a very wet morning. Sentries are posted and everything, and possibly Winnebago warriors, but certainly warriors tried to penetrate the camp, crawling in to the camp, and they even make it past the sentries.
Around 4 in the morning, a picket stationed a few yards out beyond the left flank of the camp thought he saw something moving in the trees. Whipping his musket to his shoulder, he fired blindly into the gloom, mortally wounding a Kickapoo warrior as he attempted to steal into the camp. Harrison himself was in his tent when the first shot rang out, followed by a series of blood-curdling war cries and a tremendous crash of muskets as the war party rushed in. The Battle of Tippecanoe had begun.
It was a classic Indian attack. If you don't have the numbers on your side, you make a sudden attack and try to overwhelm and demoralize the enemy quickly. And it was carried through at Tippecanoe with great determination, considering how few warriors there were, and they didn't have much ammunition. The Indians were a very mobile force. They were almost like water. They gave way to things and they strengthened around weak points in a very flexible way. They didn't have to wait for orders from chiefs. They fought very much individually. So if they perceived a force getting out of its depth, moving forward and getting split up from the main force, they could easily rally round and start surrounding it and cutting it to pieces. I mean, if there had been more Indians on the ground, the Indians might have been capable of inflicting great damage.
The Indian warriors attack Harrison's army in camp at dawn. For a moment, it looks as if the Indians have infiltrated the lines, there's confusion, but as the light increases, it becomes clear to the Americans that the Indians lack the numbers, that they lack the ammunition to carry this assault home. And eventually, the Indians are driven from the field. In reality, the Americans suffered probably more casualties than the Indians. The American force was superior, the American force was better armed, the American force had more ammunition. But I do think that it represents a blow to the Confederacy.
On the night of November 8th, 2 days after the battle, Harrison's soldiers edged warily into Prophetstown for the first time, only to find that the Confederated forces had dispersed into the surrounding countryside. Ordering his men to plunder the village, setting fire to the lodges and destroying all the Indians' food supplies, Harrison headed back down the Wabash towards Vincennes, declaring in dispatches his mission had been accomplished.